Warren, it's so good to see you again. I was looking at it. We had a conversation, believe it or not. It's almost been 4 years. I can't believe that I thought it had been two, but I cannot believe that it's been 4 years since we had our initial conversation.
It's a sign of aging. The older you get, the shorter the period of time appears to be.
We were
But and
talking about trading some red with some gray. I think we can work something out here, but
yeah, exactly,
I have a
exactly.
little bit still, a little bit of gray in there.
Right, I don't see it yet, but it's really great. Your beard is admirable. Yeah, I think it was 4 years ago because I know the Boy Crisis book came out about 4 years ago. So I think we you did one of the early interviews with me. And you
I
were in
did.
Utah, weren't you?
Yeah, I was in Utah. We moved out here to Maine about 3 years ago, and when we talked, it probably wasn't even on my radar to come out here, but it's just been such a great thing for my wife and my three boys and my daughter, and we just love it.
Oh, that's wonderful. How old are your boys now?
So I've got let me think. It's going to take me a second. I've got a 14-year-old, an 11-year-old. My daughter is 8, almost 9, and then my youngest son is 6. So I got a full house
Wow.
over here.
You have a full house. Well, and you will. And has the Boy Crisis book, has that been helpful for you in raising your son
Oh,
in particular?
incredibly helpful. In fact, your book and some other information that we have access to and books and things that we've read, we decided when we moved out here that we would pull our children out of public school. So when
Hmm.
we moved here now, so it's been 3 years, about a year before COVID and the reaction to COVID, we decided that we would homeschool our children for some very deliberate and intentional reasons. And I know you talk a lot about the school system being stacked against our young men and set up for our young ladies. And that coupled with some other thoughts that we had, my wife and I made the decision to pull our kids out of public school and start homeschooling or home based
Wow.
education.
And how has that been? How has that been for the development of the kids?
That's been great. I mean, it's been great. The beautiful thing about homeschool, and I talk a lot about this with the guys, is that instead of having 25, 30, 35 kids in the classroom, we have four. We know them obviously intimately. My daughter is dyslexic. I didn't know that until we started homeschooling. My wife would say the same
Wow.
thing. And then we can cater their experience and their learning and education based on some aptitude that they may have for certain things versus others. And so it's a beautiful. I don't have any problem with school teachers. I really have a problem with the system in general that made us make that decision. It's been really good.
Yeah. Oh, I'm very glad to hear that. Now, how do you give them good social skill training, meeting other kids, meeting strangers, meeting kids they don't like? How does that work in with homeschooling?
I, I'm that's one of the biggest questions that we get. So they're very involved and active in physical activity. So it's through powerlifting. My two oldest boys do powerlifting with about 5 to 6 other young men in the community. My two oldest boys also play football. So they're very active in football with their teams and whatnot. My daughter is very involved in dance. And then we have a very tight knit CrossFit community and friends that we spend a lot of time with. We invite them over. We have barbecues and dinners and things together. And then we're actually working this year will be our first year with a co-op where there's 5 other families in the community who are all home-based education, where they're going to be learning from other parents involved with other kids. Because that was my biggest concern is how do you make sure they get the social interaction? And I really like that you said kids they don't like. That's one of the things that I think a lot of people overlook because that interpersonal dynamic is huge. And I think a lot of home based education parents overlook the importance of that.
Yes, and it's important, you know, when you homeschool somebody, you're almost always going to train your son and your daughters, but especially your sons, not to be bullies. But it's also as important to make sure that they know how to handle bullies and
Mm,
not just handle them by beating them up, but handle them by respecting the bully's need to be respected and understanding that under almost all anger and abusiveness is vulnerability and sort of being able to connect to that vulnerability. I remember in the Boy Crisis book, I think you may remember reading, where I said I learned that sort of almost intuitively as a kid, and I was in about eighth grade, and I had moved over from another school district, another town to the town that we lived in. The town we lived in was much more working class. The new town was much more working class, and I sort of stood out as a student. And one of the boys really, who was a sort of gang leader, he really sort of thought of me as being sort of the goody two shoes. And he confronted me one day, and he had a brick in his hand, and he was ready to throw that brick right through my head. And he just really basically wanted to get rid of me. And I said to him, that it was really great that he was the leader of this gang. And because and what did I think? What did he think that the leadership skills that he had that led to him being selected as a leader and being able to sustain himself as a leader? And he like started to get into that. And he told me what he thought his leadership skills were. And as he did that, his brick just dropped. And the hand dropped, and then the brick just dropped to the ground. And it was
Wow.
like, I was, and what I was, and I didn't have, I hadn't read books like The Boy Crisis, and that told me here's a good way to approach a bully. But it was sort of like, I guess it was a survival instinct that led me to just reaching for that. And or else I may not have been around here today to talk about it.
Well, it's interesting. I think this is where our paths might diverge a little bit because when I hear you tell that story, my immediate reaction is I would tell that guy, you have one shot, and if you miss, you're dead. So it's a very interesting thing when you come at it from this perspective, which obviously worked, clearly worked.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's so many different ways to approach the situation. I'm always trying to figure out the balance between toughness and assertiveness with my young men specifically,
Yes.
maybe
Yeah.
more so than my daughter, and the balance between that and tenderness and care and empathy, which I think is what you exhibited here in this story you're sharing.
Yes, and at the same, first of all, you've put your finger now exactly on the biggest point that is of value, I think, which is the word balance. And it's
Mm.
having the skill sets to both be able to confront, and at the same time the skill set to be able to understand that bullies and bullies, both the bully and the bullied, have in common oftentimes low self-esteem, feelings of insecurity. And so it is interesting that the opposite behaviors are manifested with the underlying similar personality characteristics. And so there's sort of two ways of approaching sort of a bully, if you will. One is the way I just shared, and the other way, my father, this worked at a different time in my growing up. My father had always said basically, you have to stand up to a bully, just like you were just talking about, and
Right.
let him know that you just can't be pushed around, and that you need to be respected, basically. And my father had taught me to box and to wrestle, but in the eighth grade in this school also that I just was talking about moving to, there was another guy there that was a sort of muscle leader, and he had the same type. He was a muscle builder, and he was very respected and absolutely gorgeous, and he was very much known for being a bully. And my father had taught me both to box and to wrestle. But I knew I couldn't outbox this guy. And he sort of kept confronting me and sort of calling me chicken to, sort of encounter with him. And I did agree to wrestle with him. And my father taught me well enough that I was able to pin him down in a few seconds. And when I had him pinned down, he said, "Please let me up. I'll always support you."
Mm.
Um, and I let him up, and two things happened there. One is he did follow through. He always supported me after that. And B, what was the deepest sadness for me is even though I was good in my schoolwork, etc., and generally decent in sports, um, I got more respect from my classmates from being able to pin him down than I did from anything else I did. And for me, that was very, very sad.
Hmm.
That the respect came to me from being able to be somebody who won at a wrestling match rather than, made contributions through being good at school or somewhat decent in sports. I was not never a standout, but I was good at sports. And I had started the soccer team in my school, etc. And yet that didn't command as much respect as as this little wrestling match. And
But do
the
you
fact,
think so? A question on that, because I don't disagree. I can certainly see why men will respect another man or young boy in this case with some sort of physical aptitude. But as we get older, don't you think the same level of respect would be commanded if you became the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, or you were maybe a more superficial metric would be you drive around a Lamborghini or you wear, the $10,000 watch? Don't you think that the same level of respect would be granted on some other metrics that might be a better metric of aptitude as you get older and more mature?
yes, and I would say even those metrics are really sad metrics also,
Mm.
because for us to be evaluating, for me to evaluate myself on on the Lamborghini, which I do not have, and
Neither do I.
or right, or the other equivalent measures, or even oh, this is Warren Farrell. He wrote X number of books, and you
Right. New
know.
York Times bestselling author.
Yeah,
These sort of titles, right?
yes, exactly. And and I hope that as the more mature I become, that the more I look for respecting people who can listen, who can not be concerned with themselves, who can not be focused on what type of home they have, and you want to live in a nice home in a nice place, but that should not be our definition of ourselves. How well you're raising your children, your devotion to them in homeschooling, the way you communicate with your wife, the way you listen to your wife, and the way you give space to each of your kids to speak up and share what's inside of them. As you know, in the Boy Crisis book, I have a whole section on family dinner night, and particularly on how to prevent family dinner nights from becoming family dinner nightmares. And and one of the important things about family dinner nights is not only teaching the parents how to listen to the kids and be empathetic with the kids' stories and not interrupt the kids' stories, but also making sure that the kids are required to listen to the parents' stories, the parents' versions, and not interrupt the parents' stories. One of the ways to make sure that children are not empathetic is to always be empathetic toward the children, as opposed to both being empathetic toward the children and also requiring the children to be able to demonstrate empathy toward the parents and to their brothers and sisters.
Got it. So you have to
Empathy
allow
has
them
to,
the opportunity to be empathetic, is what you're saying.
more so than even allow them the opportunity to be, would be ideal. Most kids, when they're younger, do not pursue that opportunity. They have to be required to develop the discipline to move from a self-centered space to a balance between self-centered and other-centered space.
Interesting. Required versus allowed. That's
Allow, yeah,
interesting because I see a lot of this manifest itself in society today. And I think it started with the whole, the phrase we all hear, and this may be more indicative of when you were younger because you're a bit older than I am, is, kids should
no,
be seen and not heard. No, 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 of course not.
yeah, of course not.
Right. And then you graduate to this newer age version of parenting, which is where no, kids now can dictate their gender and they can dictate what time they should go to bed and what activities they should be involved in. And I
Yeah.
think both are opposite ends of the extremes, the spectrum. And I don't think either are correct.
I have three perspectives on that. Yes, yes, and yes. So totally agree with you. And it really is, we've jumped from one extreme to the other, and both extremes are really very damaging to the children.
Hmm. I'm very curious about this way that young boys approach their self-esteem issues. You said it manifests itself, and I'm sure again there's a spectrum, but it manifests itself potentially as the weakling, right? The coward who is timid and passive and lets himself get railroaded. And then you have the bully who asserts himself and attempts to dominate, not through capability, but through intimidation. Is that a nature thing that more young men are designed to act one way or the other? Or is that something that's nurtured through their environment, through parenting or lack thereof, and exposure to other stimulus that makes them behave one way or the other?
The answer to that is yes, meaning it's
Okay.
both. It's nature and nurture combined. And if I were to give percentages, about 70% nature and about 70% nurture, meaning
Hmm.
that it's so that as you're a veteran, and so as you trained in the military. Even if you went into the military and you were overprotected, which you probably weren't, but as you know, many people in the military boys who have single mothers, they have a higher percentage chance of joining the military than any other single parenting group. And that's
Really?
actually, yes, and that's actually quite useful because oftentimes the single mothers do not do as much boundary enforcement as the children would have if they had both fathers and mothers, and an active father, who usually requires more boundary enforcement. So both the child, but both the boy and the parent and the mother sort of sense that the boy needs structure
Wow.
and is without it. And the military, as you know, creates that structure. So the boy going into the military, and it also creates requirements. So you weren't given the option of doing getting up at a certain time, doing certain things, running certain paths, training in certain ways. You were required to do that, and as you're required to do that, different synapses develop in your brain that begin to change what you would think of as nature. But it's in our nature to be able to adapt to social messages. That's why it's 70% nature and 70% nurture. And one of the things along those lines that is fascinating is that many people think of mothers as being more biologically oriented toward raising children than dads are. But children raised by dads children raised by dads and moms together tend to do the best on average. But children raised by fathers only do better than children raised by mothers only. And one
What
of
do
the
you mean
main
by do
reasons
the best? When
do
you say
be-
do
by
the
do
best, what metrics are we
Yes,
measuring?
we're talking about having postponed gratification, which is the biggest predictor of success or failure. Being able to have discipline, being able to have a warm and open and loving personality that other people can connect with, being able to listen, able to have social skills. So, for example, to be concrete about it, a typical one of the things that I found that when I did the research for the boy crisis that I found was in no parenting magazine and no other parenting book was helping parents understand the difference between what I came to call mom style parenting and dad style parenting. And mom style parenting tends to be more identifying the children's strong points, helping the children feel proud of themselves because they're a good singer or they have a good basketball skills or or they're a good scholar or whatever, and encouraging them to sort of pursue that. And sweetie, you want to be an Olympic gymnast like you just saw us, Simona Biles be. Yes, you can do that. That's fine. But then oftentimes the children will start to do that, and they'll get a tutor, and but they won't follow through. They'll get distracted by a new video game if they're a male in particular, or in a social engagement or somebody's birthday party, and they're not putting in the discipline to go there. Dads are more likely to sort of say, yo, listen, you want to be an NBA player? or you want to be an actor or a writer or whatever, or you want to be in the Olympics, you've got to focus on that. And if we're going to take you to practice, and if we're going to make our investment in your time, then you've got to return that. We're working overtime to be able to pay for a tutor to make sure that you're, or a coach to get you to be better at this like you want your dream is. That requires something from you. And moms will often say some version of, well, sweetie, you're being a little tough on, Mary or John. It's good for them to go to somebody's birthday party. And he says, I agree that it's good for them to go to somebody's birthday party, but they're not going to become an Olympic gymnast if they're going to a lot of birthday parties, because the people who are Olympic gymnasts are ones that are focused only on that, and they make a trade-off. They give up a lot of the rest of their life for that. And that trade-off is not necessarily healthy, but let's make a decision here. Do we want to go for something, and what level do we want to go for this at? And so it's this type of dialogue. Or another example that's, I think, a better example is, typically speaking, dads will be far more likely to roughhouse than moms will be.
Mhm.
And the dad will start the roughhousing with the kids, like you have three boys and a girl, right? Is that correct?
That's correct. Right.
And you might throw all three, boys and the girl on the couch, and say, all right, the game here is to, the four of you, you could try to pin me down before I pin the four of you down. And the kids go, yeah, right, all right, that's a great, dad. And mom is looking on and saying, oh my God, I feel like I have just one more child to monitor, and my husband.
You're
and
in our home, Dr. Farrell. You're literally in our home.
And the mom is saying to herself, okay, but the kids seem to be having a lot of fun. I don't want to be controlling. I don't want to interfere too much. On the other hand, I just fear that somebody's going to get hurt sooner or later. And sooner or later, she's about 99% likely to be right.
Somebody's
Somebody
going to
gets
get
hurt.
hurt. Of course.
Yes.
Of course it's going to
Yeah.
happen.
And then she says to herself, "No, I feel really guilty. I didn't interfere before and prevent this from somebody getting hurt." On the other hand, at least now Ryan's going to understand that he can't do this because somebody's going to get hurt. But Ryan doesn't understand that, or he doesn't look at it
No.
that way. He says, Jimmy, or whatever one of your son's name is, you can't stick your elbow in Kathy's
Yeah,
eye,
that's
or
what I was
whatever.
thinking. Well, you shouldn't have done that. Do better next time.
Exactly. And the kids will say, yes, 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 Dad, I'm sorry, no problem. I'll do better. But the next time they don't do that much better because you've only told them to do better. There was no price to pay if they didn't. So why
Mm.
do they adapt, postpone gratification if there's no price to pay by just pushing sister or brother aside? But when most dads, the second time after the children are warned, they say, okay, I gave you a warning. Now there's no more roughhousing. Now the next time you roughhouse, and then so dad goes ahead and says, okay, well, no roughhousing tonight, maybe tomorrow night or the next night we'll roughhouse. And mom is looking on going, oh my God, hasn't he learned his lesson after twice the kids have gotten hurt? But the important difference between dad and mom style parenting happens the third time. And that third time, the children now know that the last time daddy said that if they were too aggressive or too rough, they're going to lose their roughhousing. The last time daddy said that, we lost our roughhousing when we were that way. And it's now that the kids get their first step in postponed gratification. I want to push my brother or sister aside, but if I do that, I'm going to lose what I really want. So I have to postpone the gratification of winning immediately in a way that is too aggressive or too unsympathetic to my brothers and sisters' needs. And I have to focus on doing what I need to do to get that roughhousing, the roughhousing that we all want. And so
This is
that
so, this is so, one of the common phrases I hear a lot, and it's specifically directed towards the government, I think in general, is the psyop, right? This is a psyop against the American people. But, but I'm kind of hearing you say, correct me if I'm wrong, that there's a psyop with our children too. And we need to be aware of the game that's being played and what they're being taught outside of just the words that we're using and the behaviors that we're trying to mold.
Exactly. And so here's that exactly what happens with that dynamic. So now then you have said this new dynamic of you can't be aggressive and you have to think of your brothers and sisters' needs. And the kids are now saying, I know I'm gonna lose my roughhousing if I'm not aggressive, so I'm gonna stop and I'm not going to be that aggressive, or I'm going to think of my brothers and sisters' needs. Now, a number of things are happening here. The kids are understanding that they have to have the postponed gratification. They also have to think of their brothers and sisters' needs. And what the data shows is that children who do this are now required to think of their brothers and sisters' needs in order to get what they want. So empathy becomes a selfish, it's in their self-interest to become empathetic. It's in their
Hmm.
self-interest to not be too aggressive.
Do you think though that so I wrote this question down, and I know I keep interrupting you. That's because I have 1,000 questions. I have more questions than we have time for. So I wrote down here putting the needs of others above our own. So I'm hearing you say that that's a learned trait. Do you think that there's any sort of inherent nature in putting other people's needs above our own, or is that
Yes,
entirely learned?
it's learned, and it's also, once it's learned, there's something in our nature, which is the RCZ, the rostral cingulate zone of our brain, that when we do something like think of others, others give us positive feedback, and that positive feedback increases the feel-good drug dopamine in our
Mm,
brain. And this is why I say everything is nature and nurture. It is
that's
we
interesting.
we have evolved over millions of years, and if you take it back to, to the evolution at the beginning, we're talking about probably billions of years of evolution to have this enormously sophisticated system of being able to know how to survive. And to know how to survive, we had to get along with others. The people that didn't, they usually were defeated by being too
Right.
divided. And so,
So can I
and it's
share a personal story on that? I
absolutely.
I the reason I asked this is because I've been actually thinking about this today. So about 3 or 4 hours ago, I was sitting in my office and I was sending out emails and I heard a crash outside of our home on the corner. The corner that we live on happens to be a pretty dangerous intersection. I heard a crash. I knew the distinct sound. I knew exactly what had happened. So I ran out and I told my kids, "Stay here, son. You call 911. I got to run out here and do this." And I ran out and I saw this little blue sedan that had probably traveled 40 yards after it had gotten hit, and there was a young woman in the driver's side of the vehicle. And so I ran over there. I was barefoot because I just came out. I ran over there and she was bleeding from her head, and she was such it's stuck with me for about 4 or 5 hours now. It's pretty touching, actually. Just a sweet young woman. She was probably in her late teens, early 20s. I could tell she had a backpack and some other things. So I think she was probably a student at the college here. And she was bleeding from her head, and just red blood had just drenched her top, that she a white striped shirt that she was wearing. And I just had this, like, I just felt so I felt so bad. And so I grabbed some napkins, I threw them on her head, I applied pressure, I asked her what her name was, I asked her what she if she was okay. And her biggest concern was, did I break the rules? That's one thing she said. Did I break the rules of driving? I'm like, I don't know, I didn't see it, but we're gonna get you taken care of. And she's fine. She had a couple minor lacerations on her head. She's fine. And I thought to myself, well, like I did that because that's the right thing to do. That's what we do. That's the right thing to do. But now, as you're saying this, maybe it's not that I did it because it's the right thing to do. Maybe I did it because I feel really good about my ability to do so.
Mhm.
And so maybe and I'm not saying this in a bad way, but maybe there's some selfish reasons behind it. And it's that dopamine hit or whatever it is in our chemical makeup that makes us do what I think we all objectively would agree is the right thing to do.
Oh, yeah, no, that's absolutely the case. And if you, especially if you are trained, if you are trained to look at it that way, and it's there's the way if we're always trained to just think of ourselves, then we don't get the dopamine hits from doing things for others. So we don't have that experience of being looking forward to those dopamine hits by doing something for others. And
Mm,
so part of what the military does for men is to say that, that it's a training to be to allow yourself to know that even being completely disposable, being completely dead, you are that you have served, that you've done something for others, and that's even worth your life. And
mm.
I mean, it's one of the reasons why and so that begins to get programmed into you. And it also, these things lead to other fascinating dynamics between moms and dads. We were talking before about the roughhousing and and you mentioned something about that when you say something like that, that that the children oftentimes obey. Or maybe I suggested that, I don't know. But moms will oftentimes look at that situation of, you say, okay, you can't be too aggressive now, and you can't do this to your brother or your sister. And moms will often look on and say, after this has developed, the relationship has developed with your kids, I don't get this. I tell the kids the same thing that Ryan tells the kids, but they respond to me better. I don't know whether it's his deeper voice or he's bigger or what the story is, but what the findings show is that it's not Ryan's deeper voice or that he's bigger. That is that when you tell kids to behave a certain way and there's no consequence if they don't behave that way, or you suggest a consequence, but then you give them another chance and another chance, the kids will keep taking that other chance until they exhaust the energy of the mom, and then the mom will oftentimes, so that there's no downside in not paying attention to the mom. There is a downside in not paying attention to the dad when dad is a good boundary enforcer. Now,
Interesting.
sometimes this is reversed. The mom is the boundary enforcer and the dad isn't, and sometimes both are good boundary enforcers, and sometimes both are bad boundary enforcers. But as a rule, this is a difference in what I call dad style parenting and mom style parenting. And so what I started talking about in the Boy Crisis book is all those differences and all the misunderstandings between moms and dads that come from not understanding those differences. And then once you understand those differences, how to do what leads children to having the best upbringing, which is not to do dad style parenting or mom style parenting only, but to do checks and balance parenting. And checks and balance
Mm.
parenting requires really good communication and respect from the mom about dad style parenting and its contribution, and from the dad about mom style parenting and its respective contribution. And so that is a core part of the Boy Crisis book, is how to communicate the best intent. But most dads don't know that they can't say to moms, the data shows that when I require the children to think of their brothers and sisters' needs and to be assertive but not aggressive, those children grow up more empathetic, and they grow up more assertive but not aggressive. And therefore, as a result of that, they have more friends at school because they have social skills. And the more friends at school they have, the more less likely they are to be depressed. And the more motivated they are to be good to go to school and to study well
Mm.
and so on. And all of these things are connected. And when boys and girls don't have these, particularly boys that don't have good social skills, they oftentimes become depressed and withdraw into video games, and then become addicted to the video games, which only makes them feel more like a player in the video games and less like a player of being able to have nuanced social interaction in school. Video games.
You are telling my story. Like, it's, you are telling I feel so selfish because all these questions I have are directed for me. Let me just share. So my mother primarily raised me and my sister on my own. I
Mhm.
joined the military, to your
Like I
statistic
was
that you
saying,
gave
yes,
earlier.
yes.
She actually forced me to go play football. I wanted to play football and she said no because she was concerned. And 2 years later, she said, no, you actually have to go play football. And I didn't want to, but she forced me to. Uh, and just this idea of social intelligence, maybe is the word. I
Mhm.
didn't have that. My friends when I was younger called me the hermit. I was the hermit because I
Mhm.
didn't go out, because I didn't feel confident in spending time with other boys. I had a hard time relating with other boys.
Mhm.
And I've since learned, I've had to learn and develop those skills, and I know they are learned, and so I have been able to. Um, but oh my goodness, you are telling my story. This is unbelievable.
I'm very glad, and it's been such a joy to, I guess one of the biggest joys happened recently when, about 6 months ago or so, along the lines of what we're talking about, when somebody wrote to me and said that he had joined, he had been raised by a single mom and who was very devoted to making him happy. And he ended up becoming addicted to video games and not even knowing himself as a human being.
Mm,
And began to resent his mom because she felt he wasn't being helped by her,
sure.
and the antagonism between him and his mom became so great that he ended up living then with his aunts and his grandmothers, and none of them had men in their lives. And so he felt like he didn't really know how to become a man. And he had two things that he pointed out. He said, I felt I had no structure and I had no purpose. So he
Mm,
said, I ended up joining 8chan, which is a fascist ideological group. And he said, there I found structure and I found purpose. I felt like could have an ideology that would be, that would be superior to any other ideology I'd ever heard of. And these people were all, searching for structure like I was. And he said, so, and they and 8chan had nurtured two of the major mass shooters that the world has known, unfortunately. And he said, so I drew up a 52-page manifesto to carry out my own mass shooting, to show the world that I was somebody that should needed to be reckoned with and paid attention to.
wow.
And he said, then I don't know how I did this, but I ran across the Boy Crisis book and I read it. And when I was reading it, it wasn't so much the data that was important to me, but it felt like what you just said a minute ago, like I was a spy in his home. He said that you saw everything I was doing and saying and feeling and fearing that I hadn't been able to put words to. And when I finished reading that and feeling understood and having compassion toward who I am, I lost the that extra anger that it took to carry out the mass shooting. And so I was able to then go to a couple of psychologists and a psychiatrist, one for medication and one for sort of social help. And I want to write you and say thank you because the boy crisis, as a result of that, I saved my own life and saved the life, and indirectly you saved the life of countless other
Or
people.
spared, right? Spared.
But yes,
What,
exactly.
what, so you said with that young, I'm assuming he's a young man. What you
Young
said
man.
that he wanted to be paid attention to. He probably wanted to be significant in some way. It's very hard personally for me to wrap my head around this idea, but we see these mass shootings and they're always perpetuated by young men. A lot of them lack father structures,
Mhm.
whether it's their biological father or a father figure.
Yeah.
A lot of them are addicted to some of these drugs that are mainlined into their veins, and we don't quite know all the ramifications of that. Do you find that that's a common theme or thread, that they want to be seen? That's hard for me to imagine, but I can't deny that that seems to be a common thread.
Yes, I do. So that's exactly what he said to me. But looking at it in a bigger picture framework, there's been six mass school shooters in the 21st century that have killed 10 or more people. Actually seven, and we know the family backgrounds of six of them. And of those six that we know the family backgrounds for, every single one of them has been deprived, what I call dad deprived,
Mm-hmm.
deprived of a significant involvement of the biological father. Unfortunately, the biological father is more important than the stepfather. The stepfather can be very helpful. I'd be happy to dig into how the stepfather can be helpful and what usually prevents the stepfather from being helpful. But it was the absence of the biological father that was the factor in all those cases. The boy lived with the mother and usually had an antagonistic relationship with the mother, and then was sometimes passed on to a grandmother or an aunt, just like this boy in Uvalde. This is all true of the boy in the last big mass shooter in Uvalde, Texas. And so these, and so this is, and so the boy doesn't feel like he has a father creating that postponed gratification that gives him the discipline to be able to do the things he really wants to do. So I am now communicating back and forth on Zoom with this potential mass shooter who is fortunately averted. And part of what he had at the very beginning was an enormous amount of anger toward his mom. And
Mm.
so I asked him to role play his mom and what her intent was. And when he role played his mom, he said, he expressed his enormous anger toward his mom for just letting him play these video games all the time and never learning how to be a human being in the world. And so he said to his mom, "Why did you do this to me?" So I asked him to role play his mom, make believe he was his mom. And he said, as his mom, because you seemed so happy then. And when I wanted you to be happy, and I love you, and and this is the only thing that seemed to make you happy. So I didn't want to take this away from you. And when he began to really get into that, he began to see that his mom's best intent was his love for him,
Of course.
even though she didn't do what he was needed. To do what he needed would have made him unhappy, and so she didn't want to make him unhappy. And in that desire to give him immediate gratification, she didn't help him get the structure and the postponed gratification that he needed from being outside of his comfort zone of being just one more figure in the video games.
I do want to talk about a couple of things, stepfathers. I also want to talk about how to help encourage or lead your wife when maybe she doesn't see the importance of your role as a man in it. But
Mhm.
when you bring it up as a mother's love, and I think generally speaking that's probably true, what then is a woman's role in the development, specifically let's talk about young men? What is her role? It's just that you come from a very interesting perspective where you spent a lot of time in the feminist movement, you spent a lot of time with women's issues, and then more recently have spent a lot of time with focusing on young men and the crisis of boys and masculinity in general. And so I love this perspective. I'm curious what you believe to be the role of a mother in that dynamic of raising the boys.
Yes. Well, the boys definitely benefit from mother involvement and sort of being able to sort of um, be seen by their moms for their best talents and being nurtured and having those talents pointed out and having moms brag on them, and just knowing that in a mom's space they feel they can say anything to the mom, or the mom at least facilitates them saying anything, and always has their best interest at heart, and is usually concerned about, is right there to prepare a meal, is to make sure that he has the right clothes to wear to school and things like that. Moms contribute so much, including love. But one
How
thing
does
that
that counter though with the 60s version of feminism and the third wave version of feminism? Because you just said to cook him a meal, to make sure he has the clothes. I think that's a traditionally held notion of femininity and
Mhm,
motherhood. But how
mhm.
does that juxtapose with today's perspective of a mother and her role, either in the home or community or workforce?
Yes, if she's in, first of all, it really, children that do best do have two highly involved parents. And so, and men and women have a lot of flexibility and fluidity in their roles. And you can have a father raise the children and do the cooking and so on. But statistically speaking, men and women are very flexible until they have children. And as they have children, the overwhelm of the responsibilities usually leads to the children to moms being more likely to be involved with the children at home, and dads being more likely to go to the workplace. Now that's not an advocacy on my part, because children that are raised predominantly by dads do extremely well. And one of the reasons why children raised predominantly by dads do extremely well is because when moms raise children predominantly in the traditional sense, dads sometimes try to supply the money. And in the process of supplying the money, they oftentimes don't pay as much attention to the children as would be optimal for the children. Whereas when
I
dad,
also imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, that if it's the dad that's primarily raising the children, that they are by default of our current societal norms going to be exposed to women, whether it's through the public school system or grandmas around. But if you take dad out of the picture, the likelihood of that child, son or daughter, being exposed to a fixture, a masculine, manly fixture, is significantly less than the default of them being exposed to women in education or women in some sort of nurturing role.
that's exactly correct. And also to start, that's correct at every level. So the first level is that when the dad is the primary breadwinner, oftentimes in order to be able to support the family, especially you have four children, to be able to support them in a loving way, if the dad is the primary breadwinner and the mom is largely at home taking care of the children, the dad often keeps accepting jobs that take more and more responsibility, which take him more and more away from home. And also, like if he's a salesperson locally when they were single, and now they have four children, he will oftentimes accept responsibilities to be that salesperson nationally. And so that will take him away from home for weekends and so on. And whereas the mom is less likely to be willing to take those jobs that take her away nationally. And so so she can be there for the children's recital. She can be there for the children's birthday party and so on. And so there's a tendency for when the mother is the primary caretaker, for the children not to have as much of dad as they need. Whereas when the dad is the primary caretaker, mom is more likely to still remain involved and not take job responsibilities that lead her to break the glass ceiling, but be away from the children too often. And it's one of the reasons why women who are mothers very rarely break glass ceilings unless they have a full-time dad taking care of the children, or they have a full-time nanny, but the children raised by full-time nannies as opposed to full-time dads do not tend to do as well or feel as loved and secure as the children raised by a combination of dad and mom.
So, tough question, potentially politically incorrect.
Mhm.
What would you then suggest to a man who is looking for a lifelong partner and a female? What do the statistics say about a woman who would like to be in the career pursue a career versus a woman who would like to pursue being a homemaker and finds value in being at home and raising her children and potentially homeschooling her children and that sort of thing? Does that have a play on who we should look to partner with?
Yes, and it depends on rather than it be the traditional way of, of have mom be homemaker and dad be breadwinner. One of the things that we really need to work with our daughters on is to understand that if she wants to be a have-it-all woman, if she wants to break glass ceilings, if she's motivated by her career and those types of challenges, and she also wants to have a happy marriage, and also have children that are raised well, then what she needs to look for is a man whose propensities are being more of a nurturer connector rather than a provider protector. But in order for that to work, The woman has to respect the man for being in that role. Marriages in which
Interesting.
men are the primary caretaker fall apart if the man does not feel that she respects the man for being the primary caretaker.
Does
Um,
she generally?
no, that is not, that often, usually not. It is an effort. It is a training. It is a conscious selection process. And women are very much more likely to be at work. And then somebody who's really an outstanding person at work, they have respect for that person. And they're likely to pull away and feelings of attraction to that person. The father will pick up that energy, pick up maybe go to a Christmas party or a holiday party, and we'll start seeing the connection between his wife and that man that's more successful. And then that will lead to anger and so on. And the woman will feel, well, gee, you're so insecure. And then that will go down a sliding slope of negativity, which is one of the reasons why two things are so important is helping women understand that this is the type of, if you have the type of personality that wants to be a have-it-all woman, you can't allow yourself to fall in love with another superstar type of male and raise children. You can do that if you don't want to raise children. But if you want to raise children and you want to have something other than a nanny take care of the children, and you want your children to feel as internally secure as possible and to feel the love of their mother and father, in selecting all of this, one has to always remember that a child looks in the mirror, and the child, when she or he looks in the mirror, is half the mother and half the father, and they sense that. I have the, that thick, beautiful hair of my father. I have this quality of my mom, and if either one of them are not around to love them, but the nanny is wonderful. They don't feel the connection from the nanny that is that half of
Of
them.
course.
And this is not because nannies are bad. It's because the children need to feel that connection to the biological dad and the biological mom, which is why even though stepdads can be helpful, it's rare that the stepdad is as, when I wrote, the Boy Crisis book and a book before that on this issue, and I was a stepfather. I sent this to the draft of the book to the biological father. He was impacted by it enough to move back from 500 miles away from the children to be more with the children, because he saw
Wow.
that it wasn't Warren Farrell, stepdad, that was really needed by the children. Yes, he has all these sort of nurturer connector skills, but it makes less difference than it does for the children to have him with them.
So I take a little bit of an issue with this phrase that you've used of the have it all woman.
Yes.
I just I just don't think that's possible. I think and help let's talk about this. Let's hash this out a little bit to the degree that we can. I just when we say that, basically what we're telling women is that you can go out and you can pursue this incredible career and you can make partner and you can run this Fortune 500 company and you can be the best possible mother. And I just don't think that's the case. The same way as a father, though, too. I recognize that although I work at home and I try to be as active as possible as I can in my kid's life, there is a sacrifice that I have to make. And I think generally speaking, based on what I've seen, men are more prone to make that sacrifice, and women, especially as they get older and potentially lose some of their childbearing years, start to hold some regrets and some animosity about some decisions regarding being this quote unquote have it all type woman.
Yes, I actually agree with you. When if you're, but there's a degree issue here. When women have children, and they want to have really good careers, they can do that if they are prioritizing their being home for their children and with their children. And so but that prioritization of being home with and for their children usually will prevent them from breaking a glass ceiling of being a CEO of a significant
Right.
company.
Right.
And if they are a CEO of a significant company, oftentimes that priority of being with their children will begin to get lost in the shuffle. And so you're absolutely right. But have it all in that looser sense of I want a career, and a career is really inspiring to me. As long as you're not, as long as you are also prioritizing when there's a conflict between the children and the career, there's enough flexibility there to be with the children to a greater degree, even though the children may have to occasionally miss the mom for this reason or that reason, and a certain amount of that is not bad, but too much of that goes the other way. But that does usually prevent the woman from being have it all in the sense of being a CEO of a significant corporation or doing a startup that requires usually an enormous amount of time in the early years. So you're absolutely right there.
Yeah, and I'm not putting this just on, I put this on myself. I think about my business. There's been many times where I've throttled the business. Maybe there was an opportunity to go speak in public that I could have made 5 or 6 figures in the pursuit of doing. And I've decided, thank you, but no, thank you.
Yes,
They're,
that is,
they're just choices. And to say that we can have it all is a bit of a misnomer. You can have anything, but you can't have all of it.
yes. If you're taking it, if this is a thing of degree. If you want a career while you're raising children, and you define have it all that way, that is possible if you have the father at home helping to raise the children, and particularly if there's less danger as a mom that you will get carried away because there's less identity. For women, there's less identity and going around saying I'm a CEO, because and if you have children, there'll also be lots of people questioning the amount of involvement you have with your children. Whereas if you're a dad and you're a CEO, the people will often stop with the admiration for you being that CEO and not take you to, what's your relationship with your children like. And so we as people, as supporters of healthy children, we need to be able to make sure that we are talking with fathers and mothers about what's your connection to your children. And in that framework, here's an important thing. Once your family has, depending on where in the United States you live, between $50,000 and $80,000 worth of income for a family of four. Once your family has that amount of income per year for a family of four, the children benefit more from dad's time than dad's dime.
Hmm.
That,
What was the amount? What amount did you say?
somewhere
Time versus
depending on
dime. I
where,
like that.
yes, between 50 and 80,000, depending on where in the United States you live. Obviously, to live
Sure.
in Maine is a lot less expensive than living, in San Francisco or New York
Right.
City.
Sure.
And
Sure.
so, but the children very rarely go to therapists and say, "I wish my father or mother spent more money on me."
Yes. I imagine
But
that
they,
doesn't get brought up a whole lot.
No, no, and many people are likely to say, we came from a poor background, but I had a lot of love for my mom and dad, and that allowed me to be resilient, or to get through a lot of things in life, and it wasn't so bad, and I appreciate this and that as a result of not having so much money.
Yeah, that's a good point. Even in my own, again, anecdotally, there were stretches, months at a time where, I just didn't see my mom a whole lot. And it wasn't because she was out doing her thing. It was because she was working 2 and 3 jobs at a time to make sure I never had to question whether it was food on the table or a roof over our head. And looking back
Yes,
on it now, and I think, there's probably a lot of nights where my mom was in her bedroom by herself alone, crying herself to sleep and never making a sound that me or my sister could hear.
yeah, yeah. I would bet you are right.
I think there's a big element to what you're talking about here with just knowing yourself, right? Knowing what you want, knowing what you're after, and then being willing to make those trades. But I am very interested as we get closer to time here, what you would suggest to a man? Maybe it's a first time marriage, maybe it's a second or third marriage with stepchildren and stepfather situation, so that a man could help get his wife on board with understanding his contribution, although she may not fully understand his contribution to the dynamic of the marriage and the dynamic of raising children.
Yes, very good, very important question. The most important single thing I can suggest is go to the chapter in The Boy Crisis where I talk about the differences between dad style parenting and mom style parenting, and fill yourself with why your style parenting, your likelihood to tease more, your likelihood to encourage the kids to take risks more, your likelihood to be okay with the children failing more, your likelihood to be willing to roughhouse more, your likelihood to do sports and activities with the children in which you actually participate, your likelihood to beat the children at the sport when they're not focusing enough and letting them cry and come out the other side of that and still knowing that you were there for them. Dozens of things like that are differences between dad and mom style parenting on average. Again, sometimes it's reversed. The and then once you get those under your belt, um, do not treat them as this makes my style parenting better, but rather that this is a contribution that I offer. And let's talk about your contribution and let's get the best of both worlds together. So the children want to climb a tree. Mom feels it's too dangerous, maybe in a few years. Dad feels it's not so dangerous. The child should be allowed to climb the tree. And mom and dad negotiate, okay, the child can climb the tree, but not be past a certain point. And dad, you have to be out underneath the tree without your cell phone to in case the
That's
child
different.
falls
Absolutely.
falls out of the tree, right? So you can cushion the child, and then but dad has to know that climbing that tree increases risks. Risk is riskier, and risk taking and knowing what risk to take and what risks not to take actually develops synapses in a child's brain, connects them, that increases a child's intelligence, IQ, literally IQ. And but
Mm.
there's so much evidence to show that dad style parenting has something to offer. But to this day, I've never heard a dad say, sweetie, I'd like to do some roughhousing with the kids because I think it'll make them more empathetic. So,
That's
and
counterintuitive.
yeah, it's so counterintuitive, and moms can't hear what dads don't say. And on the other hand, dads and need to also listen to what mom's contributions are. What the contribution of making sure that the child has you under the tree when she or he potentially falls, and that you're not focused on your cell phone, you're focused on the child falling. But on the other hand, that you're not telling the child everything to do, what to do and what not to do, as a mom is more likely to do. No, sweetie, don't go there. The dad is more likely to let the child go there and learn from making a mistake that was not the place she or he should have gone to. And so all of these things are balancing acts. So once you understand, now let me spend a moment with a mom who's a single mom like your mom was. And so what to do if you are a single mom and you don't have that dad to balance this.
Mhm.
Number one, ask yourself the question, can you get the biological dad involved again? And if the answer is no, ask yourself a second question of, know men well enough to know that when men feel needed, wanted, and valued, they almost always appear. Think, every generation
Mm.
had its war. When Uncle Sam said, we need you to be willing to die so others can be saved and live, every generation of men stepped forward when they were told they were needed, they were willing to die to serve, just like I doubtless you did in the military. And so if you tell a dad, I have learned what the value of your dad style parenting is. I didn't understand that before, The children need this to be part of their life in balance with me. I want to be able to do good communication training with you so I can hear your contribution and have you hear my contribution. I do couples communication workshops all around the country exactly for this reason. If you don't have good communication, you tend to get a divorce. You get a divorce, there tends to be less father involvement. If less father involvement, there tends to be a boy crisis. They're all connected. And so the first job is to see if you can get the biological dad involved. If you can't get the biological dad involved, make sure your children are involved with the liberal arts of sports, which is basically team sports, pickup team sports, and individual sports like gymnastics that contribute to a team, but there's a lot of focus on discipline. And then make sure you make contact with the male coaches for your sons to make sure that and for your daughters to make sure that the female and your daughter and son has somebody in their life who can care for them that's male. But that's particularly important for your son because if you're a female and he's a male and he has no option of another male role model, that leaves him going oftentimes from a home to a school with very few female male role models. And there's usually not a diversity of male role models at school. Even there's usually a very small number, and most of them are nurturer connector type of men rather than provider protector men.
Or
And you want
coaches, and if you're not playing sports, you're not going to be introduced to them.
exactly, exactly. And so also make sure you get your children involved with faith-based communities. And no matter what your faith is, make sure the person, the priest, the rabbi, the minister, or the imam, that he organizes your son into small groups with other boys his age, in which the boys learn to express their feelings confidentially to each other. So your boy sees that his insecurities are not abnormal, that they're not his
Interesting.
alone. And so just spend time in the Boy Crisis book looking at all the things you can do to get your son to have a stepfather involved. Involving a stepfather does not mean your son is going to get the benefits of a stepfather. Learn the difference between the multiple types of involvement of a stepfather so that allow the stepfather not to be just an advisor that's powerless, but to have an equal balance of power with you, even as a stepfather.
I have so many more notes. I think we're gonna have to do another one if you're open to it, because I a couple of things that I want to talk more about with you at a future date is issues like same-sex marriage. Um,
Mhm.
you know, if there's a boy crisis, is there a girl crisis in the lack of fatherhood? I got so many questions. So if you're open to it, I'd love to have another conversation. But this has just been so valuable, and I've always appreciated our talks and, of course, your wisdom. And I heard you on Jordan Peterson's podcast several weeks or a month or so ago. I read your book. I haven't read any of your others. Maybe I need to pick up a few of your others. I've only read The Boy Crisis, but I've been so enlightened, and it's really helped me be a better parent, a better father for my children, and leader in the community as well.
Oh, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. It's, and you ask great questions. You are personal. You connect to your real life. And then you listen really well. And so it's just a pleasure being interviewed by you and interviewing a little bit, interviewing you as well.
That
And
Yeah, you asked me some good questions as well. Is
and
there any
so
way
yeah, so the
where
answer
the
is yes.
good. I'd love to do that. Is there anywhere that you would direct the guys who are listening to be able to connect with you? Obviously, pick up a copy of The Boy Crisis. Any other resources or directions you could give the men?
Yes, one thing is I've gotten a lot of positive feedback to the audible version of the Boy Crisis from a lot
Ooh.
of people who are, if you do commuting or you do, you're on a treadmill and stuff doing exercises, often listening to the audible version is very much easier. If you're a reader of the print version has the value of having all the 800 footnotes in the back and to be able to go over it a little bit more easily in that way. So don't shy away from whatever style allows you to learn the best. The Boy Crisis, Amazon has it on sale now, but if if you have enough money, just support your local bookstore, and that.
Excellent. Well, we'll sync everything up. We'll let the guys know. And Dr. Farrell, again, I appreciate you. Thank you for what you do. And I talked about this, your background is just so diverse and so distinct that I think it gives you a power that a lot of us may not quite have because we haven't seen it from both sides of the equation. And you certainly have. So really appreciate you taking some time with us today.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure working with you and talking with you.